The cafeteria explosion happened so fast that most students didn't even see it coming. One moment, Emma Rodriguez was quietly eating her sandwich at the corner table, and the next, her entire lunch tray was flying through the air, coating her, uniform in chocolate milk and mashed potatoes. Tyler Brooks stood over her, phone already recording, his signature cruel grin spreading across his face as Emma's shocked expression turned to tears of humiliation. But what Tyler didn't know was that Principal Sarah Martinez had been watching from across the room. What he definitely didn't expect was her reaction. Instead of the typical administrator response of calling for calm, Sarah Martinez moved with the precision of someone who had seen enough. In exactly 60 seconds, Tyler Brooks and his crew would discover that their reign of terror at Riverside High School was about to come to a devastating end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The chaos in the Riverside High cafeteria reached a fever. Pictures Emma Rodriguez sat frozen in her chair, covered head to toe in her own lunch. Chocolate milk dripped from her dark hair, while chunks of mashed potatoes clung to her crisp white blouse. The entire scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Around her, the cafeteria had erupted into a mix of gasps, nervous laughter, and the distinctive sound of dozens of phone cameras clicking as students scrambled to capture the moment for their social media feeds. Tyler Brooks towered over Emma, his athletic frame casting a shadow across her small table. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, earned from years on the varsity football team, Tyler had perfected the art of intimidation. His sandy brown hair was styled perfectly, and his expensive designer clothes marked him as one of the untouchable elite at Riverside High. Behind him, his loyal followers, Mason Clark and Derek Thompson, formed their usual triangle of menace, each wearing expressions of smug satisfaction at their leader's latest display of cruelty. Mason, a lanky redhead with freckles scattered across his pale face, held his phone steady as he continued recording the aftermath. His nervous energy was palpable as he bounced slightly on his feet, clearly feeding off the adrenaline of the moment. Derek, shorter but stockier than his companions, stood with his arms crossed, playing the role of intimidating enforcer despite his round face and soft features that made him look younger than his 17 years. Emma's hands trembled as she tried to wipe the mess from her face with a napkin that had somehow survived the food explosion. Her large brown eyes filled with tears that she desperately tried to hold back, knowing that crying would only fuel Tyler's satisfaction. She had transferred to Riverside High just 3 weeks ago when her family moved to Millbrook, and already she had become Tyler's favorite target. Her quiet demeanor and slight build made her an easy mark for someone who thrived on asserting dominance over those he perceived as weak. The cafeteria's usual lunch hour buzz had transformed into something much more sinister. Students at nearby tables had either cleared out entirely or gathered closer to watch the spectacle unfold. Some looked genuinely concerned for Emma, whispering among themselves about how far Tyler had gone this time. Others seemed entertained by the drama, their faces lit up by the glow of their phone screens as they shared the incident across every social platform they could access. Tyler's voice cut through the noise with practiced ease. His tone carried the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions, each word dripping with manufactured innocence that fooled no one. "Oops," he said loudly, ensuring his voice would carry to the recording devices pointed in his direction. "Looks like the new girl had a little accident with her lunch. Maybe she should be more careful next time." The calculated cruelty in his delivery was unmistakable. This wasn't a spontaneous act of teenage mischief, but rather a carefully orchestrated humiliation designed to establish Emma's place in the school's social hierarchy. Tyler had used this exact same strategy countless times before, always managing to frame his attacks as accidents or harmless pranks that somehow never resulted in serious disciplinary action. Mason's nervous giggle provided the soundtrack to the ongoing humiliation as he adjusted his recording angle to capture Emma's distressed reaction. "This is definitely going viral," he whispered to Derek, his excitement barely contained. "Emma's epic lunch fail or something like that. The hashtags are going to be incredible." Derek nodded approvingly, his role in the group dynamics clear as he provided the muscle while Tyler supplied the strategic thinking and Mason handled the digital warfare that would extend Emma's humiliation far beyond the walls of Riverside High. Together, they had perfected a system of torment that left their victims feeling helpless and alone, with nowhere to turn for meaningful support. From her position 3 tables away, Principal Sarah Martinez had witnessed the entire incident unfold. 38 years old, Sarah carried herself with quiet authority that came from 15 years in education, including her previous role as vice principal at a much tougher urban school district. Her professional attire was always impeccable, from her tailored blazers to her sensible but stylish heels that clicked purposefully against the hallway tiles as she made her rounds. Sarah's dark eyes missed nothing as she observed Tyler's performance. She'd been principal at Riverside High for only 6 weeks, brought in specifically to address what the school board euphemistically called behavioral challenges that previous administrators had failed to resolve. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her reputation for transforming school cultures preceded her, though many in Millbrook wondered if her methods would work in their affluent suburban community where influential parents expected special treatment for their children. The careful calculation behind Tyler's attack was immediately apparent to Sarah's trained eye. She recognized the setup, the positioning, and the timing that suggested this was far from an impulsive action. The way Mason had his phone ready to record, the strategic placement of Derek to block potential intervention from other students, and Tyler's practiced delivery of his fake apology all pointed to a level of premeditation that elevated this incident beyond typical teenage misbehavior. As chocolate milk continued to drip from Emma's hair onto her already ruined clothing, Sarah made a decision that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics at Riverside High School. She had spent her first 6 weeks observing, taking notes, and building relationships with staff members who could provide insight into the school's unspoken rules and hidden hierarchies. Now she had seen enough to know that incremental change would never be sufficient to address the toxic culture that had taken root in the hallways and classrooms of what should have been a safe learning environment. The cafeteria workers behind. The lunch counter watched nervously as the situation continued to unfold. Several had worked at Riverside High for years and had witnessed countless incidents involving Tyler Brooks and his crew, most of which resulted in nothing more than gentle warnings and requests for the perpetrators to make better choices. The custodial staff member nearest to Emma's table held a mop in his hands, but seemed uncertain whether intervention would be welcome or if he should wait for official direction from administration. Sarah's movements were deliberate and purposeful. As she began walking toward the center of the cafeteria, where Tyler still stood over Emma like a predator savoring his victory. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor, creating a sound that gradually cut through the ambient noise of student conversation and nervous laughter. Students who noticed her approach began to quiet down, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The expression on Sarah's face remained calm and professional, giving no indication of the storm that was building inside her as she processed not just this single incident, but all the intelligence she had gathered. about Tyler Brooks and his enablers over the past several weeks. She had reviewed his disciplinary file, spoken with teachers about his classroom behavior, and heard whispered stories from students who had suffered under his systematic campaign of intimidation. As she drew closer to Tyler's position, Sarah's mind was already working through the series of actions she would take in the next 60 seconds. Unlike previous administrators who had treated Tyler's behavior as isolated incidents requiring gentle correction, Sarah understood that she was dealing with a pattern of calculated cruelty that demanded a proportional response. The time for warnings and second chances had passed before she ever set foot in Riverside High School. The moment Sarah Martinez reached Tyler Brooks and his crew, the entire cafeteria atmosphere shifted like the calm before a hurricane. Her voice carried across the room with crystal clarity, cutting through every conversation and silencing even the most distant tables. Tyler Brooks, Mason Clark, Derek Thompson, my office, now. The words weren't shouted, but they possessed an authority that made even the lunch staff stop what they were doing to watch the unfolding drama. Tyler's confident smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second before he attempted to regain his composure. He had dealt with administrators before, and his usual strategy involved a combination of charm, deflection, and barely concealed threats about his father's influence in the community. Principal Martinez, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Here, he began, his tone shifting to the practiced innocence he had perfected over years of manipulating authority figures. Sarah's response came swift and decisive, without giving Tyler the opportunity to launch into his prepared defense. The only misunderstanding is your belief that your behavior has no consequences. Emma Rodriguez, please come with me as well. We'll get you cleaned up and ensure you receive the support you deserve. Her attention turned briefly to Emma, whose tear-stained face showed a mixture of relief and lingering fear that this intervention might somehow make her situation worse. The walk to the administrative offices felt like a funeral procession too. Tyler and his accomplices, who had never experienced such immediate and uncompromising action from a school administrator. Other students parted like the Red Sea as the group moved through the hallways, creating an impromptu audience for what many sensed would be a turning point in Riverside High's social dynamics. Whispered conversations followed in their wake as students pulled out phones to text friends and update social media about the unprecedented scene they had just witnessed. Mason's usual nervous energy had transformed into genuine anxiety as he clutched his phone, which still contained the recording of Emma's humiliation that he had planned to share across multiple platforms. The device suddenly felt like evidence of a crime rather than content for entertainment, and his palms grew sweaty as he realized that his digital participation in Tyler's cruelty might have more serious consequences than he had ever imagined. Derek, typically the most physically intimidating member of the trio, found himself struggling to maintain his tough guy facade as they approached the principal's office. His stocky frame seemed to shrink with each step, and for the first time in years, he began to question whether his loyalty to Tyler was worth the potential fallout from this incident. The realization that he might actually face meaningful punishment for his actions was entirely foreign to his previous experience. At Riverside High, Sarah's assistant, Linda Chen, looked up from her computer as the group entered the outer office area. A woman in her mid-40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Linda had worked in school administration for over 20 years and had developed an instinct for reading the emotional temperature of any situation. The tension radiating from the student group was palpable, and she immediately understood that this was not a routine disciplinary matter. Linda, please contact Emma's parents and arrange for someone to bring her a change of clothes, Sarah instructed as she guided Emma to a chair in the corner of the office. Also, I need you to pull the disciplinary files for Tyler Brooks, Mason Clark, and Derek Thompson, all of them, going back to their freshman year. The systematic nature of Sarah's approach was already becoming apparent to everyone in the room. Tyler's confidence began to crumble as he realized that this principal was operating from a completely different playbook than any administrator he had previously encountered. His usual tactics of minimizing the incident and shifting blame were clearly not going to work with someone who had already demonstrated such decisive action. The comfortable protection he had always enjoyed from his father's influence suddenly felt much less reliable. Emma sat quietly in the corner, still picking pieces of food from her hair while trying to process the rapid changes in her circumstances. For 3 weeks, she had endured Tyler's escalating campaign of harassment, each incident designed to isolate her further from her new classmates and establish her permanent position as the school's designated victim. The swift intervention by Principal Martinez felt almost too good to be true, like a dream that might evaporate at any moment. Sarah's office was spacious but functional, with degrees and certifications covering one wall and a large window overlooking the school's courtyard on another. Her desk was organized but not sterile, with family photos positioned next to neat stacks of reports and policy documents. The overall atmosphere conveyed competence and approachability while making it clear that this was the workspace of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. "Gentlemen, please have a seat." Sarah directed Tyler and his crew to 3 chairs arranged in front of her desk. Her tone remained professional, but carried an edge of steel that made it clear this was not a request. "I want to be absolutely transparent about what's going to happen next, so there are no surprises or claims of unfair treatment." Tyler attempted one last time to control the narrative, drawing on years of experience in manipulating adult authority figures. "Principal Martinez, I really think Emma's making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. It was just an accident during lunch, and maybe some friendly teasing that got taken the wrong way. You know how sensitive some kids can be when they're trying to fit in at a new school." The calculated nature of Tyler's response revealed everything. Sarah needed to know about his character and his previous experiences with school discipline. His attempt to gaslight both Emma and the adults in the room demonstrated a level of sophisticated manipulation that could only have developed through years of successful evasion of consequences. This was not a confused teenager making poor choices, but rather a predator who had learned to weaponize the educational system's preference for giving students the benefit of the doubt. "Tyler, I watched the entire incident unfold from across the cafeteria," Sarah replied, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building inside her. "What I observed was a premeditated attack designed to humiliate Emma Rodriguez in the most public way possible. The positioning, the recording, and the aftermath were all carefully orchestrated to maximize her embarrassment and minimize your accountability." Mason's face had gone completely pale as he realized that his role as the designated videographer had been observed and understood by the principal. His hands trembled slightly as he considered the implications of having created permanent digital evidence of their cruelty, evidence that could potentially follow him far beyond his high school years. Sarah continued her systematic dismantling of their defense strategy. Furthermore, this incident represents a pattern of escalating harassment that I've been documenting since my arrival at Riverside High. Emma, you've reported 3 previous incidents involving these same students, and my conversations with other students suggest that intimidation and humiliation are standard operating procedures for this group. The revelation that Emma had already filed reports came as a shock to Tyler, who had operated under the assumption that his victims were too intimidated to seek help from school authorities. His carefully constructed image of himself as a popular student engaging in harmless pranks began to crumble as he realized that adults were finally paying attention to the patterns behind his behavior. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the weight of potential consequences began to settle over him. Unlike Tyler, who had been raised to believe that his family's status provided immunity from punishment, Derek came from a middle-class family that valued education and expected their son to maintain good standing at school. The prospect of having to explain his involvement in systematic bullying to his parents filled him with dread. Linda Chen entered the office carrying 3 thick manila folders, each labeled with one of the boys' names. The sight of their accumulated disciplinary records served as a visual reminder of how many previous incidents had been inadequately addressed by prior administrators. Sarah accepted the files with a nod of thanks, then placed them prominently on her desk, where all 3 students could see the physical evidence of their documented misbehavior. "These files tell a very interesting story," Sarah observed as she opened Tyler's folder, which was noticeably thicker than the others. "Tyler, your record shows 17 separate incidents over the past 3 years, ranging from verbal harassment to physical intimidation to destruction of other students' property. In each case, the resolution involved warnings, brief detentions, or requirements for written apologies that clearly had no impact on your behavior." Tyler's jaw clenched as he listened to the systematic recitation of his offenses, many of which he had dismissed as minor inconveniences that were quickly forgotten. The idea that someone was actually tracking his actions and identifying patterns in his behavior had never occurred to him, and the professional thoroughness of Principal Martinez's approach was unlike anything he had previously encountered. "Mason, your file shows consistent participation in Tyler's campaigns of harassment, with a particular focus on digital intimidation and social media humiliation of targeted students. Derek, your role appears to be primarily physical intimidation and preventing intervention by other students who might otherwise help Tyler's victims." Sarah's analysis revealed that she understood not just the individual incidents, but the sophisticated group dynamics that made their bullying so effective. Emma watched from her corner chair as the 3 boys who had made her life miserable were systematically exposed and held accountable for their actions. The experience felt surreal after weeks of being told by well-meaning teachers to just ignore them or try to fit in better, as if her harassment was somehow her own responsibility to solve. Sarah Martinez leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she made a decision that would reverberate throughout the entire Riverside High community. The weight of her next words hung in the air like a thunderclap waiting to happen. "Tyler Brooks, Mason Clark, Derek Thompson, effective immediately. You are all suspended pending a full investigation into your pattern of harassment and intimidation. This suspension will remain in place until we can convene a disciplinary hearing with your parents and determine appropriate long-term consequences." The color drained from Tyler's face as the reality of his situation began to sink in. In all his years of tormenting classmates and manipulating authority figures, he had never faced anything more serious than a few days of detention. The word suspension felt foreign on his tongue, a consequence reserved for other kids, rougher kids from different neighborhoods who didn't have the protection of influential parents and community connections. Mason's nervous energy finally exploded into full panic as he processed the implications of a formal suspension appearing on his permanent record. His dreams of attending a prestigious university on his parents' carefully planned trajectory suddenly felt threatened by a single moment of poor judgment in the cafeteria. The recording on his phone, which had seemed like harmless entertainment just minutes earlier, now felt like the weapon that would destroy his future. Derek's stocky frame seemed to collapse in on itself as he struggled to comprehend how quickly his world had changed. Unlike his companions, Derek had never been particularly invested in the cruel games they played with other students. His participation had been driven more by a desire to belong to Tyler's popular crowd than by any genuine malice, but the distinction suddenly felt meaningless in the face of serious consequences. "You can't just suspend us without giving us a chance to tell our side of the story," Tyler protested, his voice cracking slightly as his usual confidence abandoned him. "My father serves on the school board, and he's not going to stand for this kind of treatment. You're making a huge mistake. That's going to cost you your job." Sarah's expression remained unchanged as Tyler delivered what he clearly believed was his trump card. She had been waiting for this moment when the facade of teenage rebellion would drop away to reveal the entitled expectation of special treatment that truly motivated his behavior. "Tyler, your father's position on the school board doesn't grant you immunity from consequences. If anything, it makes your behavior more problematic because it suggests you believe rules don't apply to certain families." The mention of Richard Brooks and his influence sent a chill through the room that even Emma could feel from her corner position. Everyone at Riverside High knew that Tyler's father wielded considerable power in the community through his construction company and his connections to local politicians. Previous principals had learned to tread carefully when dealing with the Brooks family, often finding their authority undermined by phone calls from influential parents demanding special consideration for their children. Linda Chen appeared in the doorway with fresh clothes for Emma, along with a concerned expression that suggested she had overheard enough of the conversation to understand the gravity of the situation. As a longtime employee of the district, Linda had witnessed multiple administrators struggle with the delicate balance between enforcing rules and managing community politics. The decisive action Principal Martinez was taking represented a dramatic departure from previous approaches. "Emma, Linda will help you get cleaned up and changed," Sarah said gently, her tone shifting dramatically as she addressed the victim rather than the perpetrators. "After that, I'd like to speak with you privately about what's been happening and what support we can provide moving forward. This kind of treatment ends today." As Emma followed Linda to the adjacent conference room, Tyler made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "This is completely unfair. We're being punished for one little incident that got blown out of proportion. Emma's just trying to get attention because she doesn't fit in here. She's making herself a target by acting weird and antisocial." The victim-blaming strategy that had worked so effectively with previous administrators met a wall of steel with Principal Martinez. Her response came swift and uncompromising, delivered with the kind of moral clarity that left no room for negotiation or manipulation. "Tyler, your words right now are demonstrating exactly why this suspension is necessary. Your inability to take responsibility for your actions and your continued attack on the victim show a complete lack of remorse or understanding." Sarah picked up her phone and began dialing as the three boys sat in stunned silence. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Principal Martinez at Riverside High. I need you and your husband to come to the school immediately for a disciplinary conference regarding Tyler's behavior. Yes, this is urgent, and yes, Tyler is currently suspended." Her tone remained professional but firm, making it clear that this was not a request for a convenient meeting time. Tyler's eyes widened as he realized that his parents were being called to school in the middle of the workday, a humiliation that would force him to confront the reality of his actions with the two people whose approval he most desperately sought. The thought of his father's reaction filled him with a dread that was entirely foreign to his previous experience with school discipline. The second call was to Mason's mother, followed quickly by the third to Derek's parents. Each conversation followed the same pattern, with Sarah providing just enough information to ensure the parents understood the seriousness of the situation without going into details that would be better addressed in person. The systematic nature of her approach left no doubt that she had handled similar situations before and knew exactly how to navigate the complex dynamics involved. As they waited for the parents to arrive, Sarah began documenting everything that had occurred, from the initial incident in the cafeteria to the boys' responses during their conversation in her office. Her notes were detailed and precise, capturing not just the facts of what had happened, but also the attitudes and demeanor displayed by each student. This documentation would prove crucial in the battles that lay ahead. Mason broke the tense silence with a voice barely above a whisper. "Principal Martinez, I know what we did was wrong. I just want you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to fit in with Tyler's group, and I guess I lost sight of how our actions were affecting other people." His attempt at taking responsibility felt genuine, though whether it came from true remorse or calculated self-preservation remained unclear. Derek nodded frantically in agreement with Mason's statement, eager to distance himself from Tyler's continued defiance. "I feel really bad about what happened to Emma. She didn't deserve that, and I should have stopped it instead of just going along with everything. I know saying sorry doesn't fix what we did, but I really am sorry." Tyler remained silent, his jaw clenched in stubborn refusal to admit any wrongdoing. His entire identity was built around being untouchable, and acknowledging fault would require dismantling the carefully constructed image that had defined his high school experience. The internal struggle between his genuine fear of consequences and his inability to show weakness played out across his facial expressions. The first parent to arrive was Derek's mother, Mrs. Thompson, a soft-spoken woman who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Her face showed genuine shock and disappointment as Linda escorted her into the principal's office, where her son sat looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had seen him in years. The weight of having to explain his behavior to someone whose respect he desperately wanted hit Derek like a physical blow. "Derek, I am so disappointed in you," Mrs. Thompson said quietly, her words carrying more impact than any shouting could have achieved. "We raised you to stand up for people who are being hurt, not to participate in hurting them. How could you be involved in something like this?" Her quiet devastation was more powerful than anger, forcing Derek to confront the gap between his family's values and his actual choices. Mason's mother arrived shortly after, her business attire suggesting she had left work abruptly to respond to the crisis. Mrs. Clark's approach was more pragmatic than emotional, immediately focusing on understanding the situation and determining what steps needed to be taken to address it. "Mason, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, and I want the complete truth. No minimizing, no excuses." The most anticipated arrival was that of Richard Brooks, Tyler's father, whose Mercedes sedan pulled into the school parking lot with the kind of aggressive confidence that matched his reputation in the community. A tall man in his 50s with graying hair and an expensive suit, Richard Brooks carried himself like someone accustomed to getting his way through a combination of wealth, influence, and carefully applied pressure. Tyler's relief at his father's arrival was palpable, his confidence returning as he anticipated the familiar pattern of parental intervention that would minimize his consequences and shift blame to others. Richard Brooks had always been Tyler's ultimate safety net, using his connections and resources to ensure his son never faced meaningful accountability for his actions. The dynamic in the room shifted dramatically as Richard Brooks entered, his presence filling the space with an energy that suggested he viewed this meeting as a negotiation rather than a disciplinary conference. His greeting to Principal Martinez was cordial, but carried an undercurrent of challenge, a subtle reminder of his position in the community hierarchy. "Principal Martinez, I understand there's been some kind of incident involving Tyler," Richard began, his tone suggesting that whatever had happened was likely being blown out of proportion. I'm sure we can work this out in a way that's reasonable for everyone involved. Tyler's a good kid who sometimes lets his enthusiasm get the better of him." Sarah's response set the tone for everything that would follow, establishing that this meeting would operate under different rules than Tyler's father was accustomed to. "Mr. Brooks, your son participated in a coordinated attack designed to humiliate another student in the most public way possible. This wasn't enthusiasm getting out of hand. This was calculated cruelty that represents a pattern of behavior we can no longer ignore." The room fell silent as Richard Brooks processed the unexpected resistance to his usual approach. His eyes narrowed slightly as he realized that Principal Martinez was not going to be intimidated by his presence or influenced by his status in the community. The comfortable assumption that his son's problems could be quietly managed through private conversations and strategic pressure was clearly not going to apply in this situation. Tyler watched nervously as his father's expression hardened, recognizing the signs that typically preceded explosive outbursts of anger. The safety net he had counted on suddenly felt much less reliable as it became apparent that Principal Martinez was prepared for whatever pressure the Brooks family might apply. The power dynamics that had always worked in his favor were shifting in ways he didn't understand and couldn't control. Sarah Martinez opened her laptop and turned the screen toward the assembled parents, her movements deliberate and measured. What appeared on the monitor wasn't just security footage from the cafeteria incident, but a comprehensive timeline of documented harassment spanning the entire semester. The digital evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic intimidation that went far beyond a single food fight, revealing patterns of behavior that had been carefully hidden from adult supervision. "This investigation began the day I arrived at Riverside High," Sarah explained as she clicked through various incidents captured by security cameras throughout the school. "What you're seeing represents just the documented evidence we've been able to gather. The reality is that most of Tyler's harassment occurs in areas and at times specifically chosen to avoid adult witnesses." Mrs. Thompson's face grew pale as she watched her son Derek deliberately block hallway exits while Tyler cornered other students. The footage showed Derek's role wasn't passive participation, but active enablement of intimidation tactics. Her hand moved to cover her mouth as she witnessed her son's transformation from the gentle boy she knew at home into someone she barely recognized. Richard Brooks leaned forward, studying the screen with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence in business disputes. His initial dismissive attitude began to crack as he realized the scope and sophistication of his son's operations. The careful planning evident in each incident suggested a level of premeditation that would be difficult to explain away as teenage mischief. Mason's mother, Mrs. Clark, focused on the digital component of the harassment campaign as Sarah pulled up screenshots from various social media platforms. The evidence showed Mason's crucial role in amplifying and perpetuating the humiliation of Tyler's victims through carefully crafted online content designed to maximize psychological damage. His technical skills had been weaponized to extend the reach of their cruelty far beyond the school walls. "The digital harassment component is particularly concerning," Sarah continued, highlighting Mason's contributions to the systematic destruction of his victims' reputations. Mason has created fake social media accounts, manipulated photos, and coordinated online attacks that have driven at least 3 students to transfer to other schools in the past year alone. Tyler's confidence continued to erode as the full scope of their activities was laid bare for parental examination. The incidents he had dismissed as harmless pranks were revealed as components of a sophisticated campaign of psychological warfare designed to maintain his position at the top. of the school's social hierarchy through fear and intimidation. Derek's mother struggled to reconcile the evidence on screen with her understanding of her son's character. The boy she had raised to be compassionate and protective was systematically helping to isolate and torment vulnerable classmates. Her quiet disappointment began to transform into something deeper as she realized how completely she had misunderstood her son's behavior at school. Sarah clicked to a new folder on her computer, revealing financial records that caught Richard Brooks completely off guard. During my investigation into the harassment patterns, I discovered some interesting irregularities in the school's construction contracts. It appears that Brooks Construction has been awarded several no-bid contracts over the past 5 years, with payment amounts significantly higher than industry standards for similar projects. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Richard Brooks realized that Principal Martinez had expanded her investigation far beyond student discipline issues. His carefully maintained composure began to crack as he understood that his business practices were now under scrutiny alongside his son's behavior. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Principal Martinez," Richard said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "My company's contracts with the school district are a matter of public record and have been approved through proper channels. I resent any suggestion of impropriety." Sarah's response was measured but pointed, revealing that she had done her homework on the Brooks family's influence in the community. "Mr. Brooks, your contracts may be public record, but the approval process raises interesting questions, particularly when we consider that you've served on the school board that approved those same contracts, creating what some might view as a conflict of interest." Mrs. Clark's business background allowed her to immediately grasp the implications of what Principal Martinez was suggesting. The intertwining of Richard Brooks' business interests with his school board position created potential ethical issues that could explain why Tyler had operated with such apparent immunity from consequences. The protection her son had enjoyed might have been part of a larger system of mutual benefit between the Brooks family and school administration. Tyler's understanding of adult conversations was limited, but even he could sense that the discussion had moved into dangerous territory that went far beyond his cafeteria antics. The look of genuine concern on his father's face was unlike anything he had ever seen, suggesting that even Richard Brooks' considerable influence might not be sufficient to contain this situation. Furthermore, Sarah continued producing another set of documents from her file cabinet. The timing of these contracts coincides remarkably with periods when Tyler faced potential disciplinary action. The pattern suggests that business considerations may have influenced previous administrators' decisions regarding your son's behavior. Derek's mother found her voice for the first time since the financial documents appeared. "Are you saying that Mr. Brooks used his business relationship with the school to protect Tyler from punishment?" Her nurse's training had taught her to recognize patterns and correlations, and the timeline Sarah was presenting painted a disturbing picture of corruption. Mason's mother was rapidly taking notes on her phone, her business instincts kicking in as she processed the legal and ethical implications of what was being revealed. The situation had clearly escalated far beyond a simple bullying incident into territory that could have serious consequences for multiple families and potentially the entire school district. Richard Brooks' face had turned red with anger and embarrassment as he realized how thoroughly Principal Martinez had researched his family's relationship with Riverside High. "This is completely inappropriate. You're supposed to be addressing a student discipline issue, not conducting some kind of witch hunt into legitimate business relationships." "Mr. Brooks, the two issues are inextricably linked," Sarah replied calmly. "Your son's belief that he's above consequences didn't develop in a vacuum. It was reinforced by years of watching his actions excused and his victims ignored while your business interests took precedence over student safety and school policy. The revelation that hit Tyler the hardest was understanding that his father's protection hadn't been based on love or family loyalty, but on business calculations designed to maintain profitable relationships with school administrators. The realization that he had been a pawn in his father's financial strategy rather than a cherished son worthy of protection cut deeper than any punishment could have. Mrs. Thompson spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion as she processed the full scope of what had been happening at her son's school. So, Derek has been participating in harassment that was essentially being covered up to protect someone else's business deals? My son's moral development has been sacrificed to maintain corrupt relationships. Sarah nodded grimly, recognizing that the parents were beginning to understand the true dimensions of the problem they were facing. The culture of impunity that allowed this harassment to flourish was deliberately maintained by adults who prioritized financial considerations over student welfare. Your sons became both perpetrators and victims of a system that failed all of them. Mason finally broke his silence, his voice barely audible as he addressed his mother directly. Mom, I never knew about the business stuff. I just thought Tyler was popular and cool, and being part of his group made me feel important. I didn't realize we were being protected because of his dad's money. Mrs. Clark's expression softened slightly as she recognized her son's genuine confusion and regret. But her anger toward the adults who had enabled the situation continued to build. Mason, honey, you still made choices to hurt other people, but it's clear that the adults who should have been guiding you failed in their responsibility. Derek's emotional breakdown began as the weight of his actions and their consequences finally penetrated his consciousness. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he sobbed to his mother. I just wanted to fit in somewhere. And Tyler's group was the only place that seemed to accept me. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I was scared that if I didn't go along with it, I'd become the target instead. The raw honesty of Derek's confession highlighted the toxic dynamics that Tyler's reign of terror had created throughout the school. Students who might otherwise have been allies, or at least neutral parties, had been forced to choose between participation in cruelty or risking becoming victims themselves. Richard Brooks made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative, his voice carrying the desperation of someone who realized his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. Principal Martinez, I think you're reading far too much into routine business relationships. Tyler may have made some poor choices, but that doesn't justify this attack on my family's reputation and livelihood. Sarah's response revealed the depth of her preparation and the seriousness of her commitment to reforming the culture at Riverside High. Mr. Brooks, I've already forwarded copies of all relevant documentation to the district's legal department and the State Education Oversight Board. This isn't an attack on your family. It's an investigation into systematic failures that have harmed countless students over multiple years. The mention of state oversight sent a chill through the room, as everyone realized that the situation had already moved beyond the local level where Richard Brooks' influence might have provided protection. Tyler's world was collapsing, not just around his ears, but around his entire family's position in the community. The final phase of Principal Martinez's comprehensive response unfolded with the precision of a carefully orchestrated symphony. Within hours of the disciplinary meeting, official expulsion notices were delivered to all three families, each document meticulously detailed with evidence that would make any appeal virtually impossible. Tyler Brooks, Mason Clark, and Derek Thompson would not be returning to Riverside High School for the remainder of the academic year, and their permanent records would reflect the serious nature of their offenses. Richard Brooks's attempts to leverage his political connections proved futile, as news of the investigation spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community. Local media picked up the story of systematic harassment enabled by corruption, transforming the Brooks family from respected community leaders into cautionary tales about unchecked privilege and abuse of power. The construction contracts that had once seemed like shrewd business moves were now being scrutinized by multiple oversight agencies, threatening not just Richard's reputation but his entire financial empire. Emma Rodriguez found herself at the center of an unexpected transformation at Riverside High School. Students who had previously remained silent about Tyler's reign of terror began coming forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The culture of fear that had dominated the hallways for years began to crumble as Principal Martinez implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future abuses and protect vulnerable students. The 3 expelled students faced dramatically different outcomes in the aftermath of their actions. Derek Thompson, with his mother's support, enrolled in counseling and eventually transferred to a different school district where he dedicated himself to anti-bullying advocacy. His genuine remorse and commitment to change earned him a second chance that he never took for granted. Mason Clark struggled more significantly with the consequences, his dreams of prestigious university admission shattered by his disciplinary record, but ultimately found redemption through community service and a deeper understanding of the harm his actions had caused. Tyler Brooks' fall from grace was the most complete and devastating. Without his father's protection and stripped of his social status, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions for the first time in his life. His transfer to a private military academy marked the beginning of a long journey toward accountability that would reshape his understanding of power, privilege, and responsibility. Principal Sarah Martinez's bold actions had consequences that extended far beyond the walls of Riverside High School. Her willingness to challenge corruption and prioritize student safety over political considerations inspired educational leaders throughout the region. The Brooks investigation led to policy changes at the district level that strengthened ethical guidelines and created new oversight mechanisms to prevent similar abuses in the future. The transformation of Riverside High's culture became a model for other schools struggling with similar issues. Emma Rodriguez, no longer a victim but an advocate, worked closely with Principal Martinez to develop peer support programs and reporting systems that empowered students to speak up against harassment. The hallways that had once echoed with fear and intimidation now buzzed with genuine learning and positive social interaction. Years later, when educators studied the Riverside High case, they would point to Principal Martinez's decisive action in those crucial 60 seconds as the moment when institutional failure was replaced by moral courage. The expulsion of Tyler, Brooks and his accomplices sent a clear message that no student, regardless of family connections or social status, was above the fundamental requirement of treating others with dignity and respect. The legacy of that day in the cafeteria extended far beyond the immediate participants. Emma Rodriguez would go on to become an advocate for bullying prevention, using her experience to help other victims find their voice and seek justice. Mason Clark's technical skills were eventually redirected toward developing digital safety programs for schools. Derek Thompson became a counselor specializing in helping young people understand the difference between belonging and participating in harmful group dynamics. Even Tyler Brooks, after years of difficult personal growth, would eventually acknowledge the harm he had caused and dedicate himself to understanding the roots of his behavior. His journey from entitled bully to someone capable of genuine empathy would take many years. But it began in that principal's office when his world of privilege and protection finally came crashing down. Principal Martinez continued her work at Riverside High, building on the foundation of accountability and respect that she had established through her courageous confrontation with the Brooks family's corruption. Her willingness to risk her career to protect vulnerable students became legendary in educational circles, inspiring a new generation of administrators to prioritize moral leadership over political convenience. The empty chair that Tyler Brooks once occupied at the popular table in the Riverside High cafeteria served as a daily reminder to students that actions have consequences regardless of family name or social position. The culture of impunity that had protected bullies for generations was replaced by a community commitment to ensuring that every student could learn and grow in an environment free from fear and intimidation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.